Today we'll discuss Unit 15 and 16 of BSOE 144, Interpretive Ethnography. What is interpretive ethnography? As we all know, what is ethnography? Ethnography is also known as participant observation. When the researcher observes the community by being a part of that community and then try to the elaborate that community, that is ethnography. And interpretive ethnography, and the roots of interpretive ethnography lie in interpretive research. We discussed about this in our previous lectures. Interpretive research paradigm is based on the assumption that the social reality is not singular or objective. You cannot, according to interpretive research, you cannot study the society objectively, right? You cannot research the society, or you cannot study the society objectively, but social reality is shaped by the human experience and social context. Social context and social experience plays an important role in social realities, and that is why we can study the social reality within its socio-historic context by reconstructing the subjective interpretations of its various participants. So you cannot study the society objectively. Actually, the social reality is influenced by the human experience and the social context. The best way to study the social reality is through the socio-historic context, and through this you can subjectively interpret its various participants. You could explain why a community is following some culture or the rituals. An interpretive methodology holds that there is no direct, unmediated access to reality. And this in turn means that the human's interaction with their external world are always already mediated by the historical, cultural context in which they find themselves. This is very important. According to the interpretive methodology, there is no direct or unmediated access to the social reality. Social reality always mediated by the historical, cultural context. History and the culture plays an important role in social reality. So it is not unmediated access. It is very important. That why it is very important to observe it and relate the social reality with historic and cultural context, and then subjectively you can explain the social reality. This is interpretive methodology. Humans are not just responsive to stimuli, but also involved in making and remaking of the meaning of those stimuli. Obviously, we respond to the stimuli, but how we respond to the stimuli, why we respond to the stimuli, is mediated by historic and the cultural context. And the humans make and remake the meanings of those stimuli from time to time, and from one community to another community, from one culture to another culture. For interpretative social reality is embedded with the social setting, and therefore they interpret the reality through a sense making rather than the hypothesis testing process. When we do the when we apply the positivist approach, or in that approach objective, when we study the society objectively, in that we prefer to test the hypothesis. But in interpretative research, that is this has been carried out in the social setting, and in this research, researcher try to interpret the reality through the sense making. He tried to understand the meaning of the stimuli, its historical and social context of that stimuli with particular community or the race, rather than testing precisely testing the hypothesis. So, in short, what is interpretive research in this? Researcher try to find out the social action and the social reality with context to culture and the history, and try to subjectively explain explain the stimuli, its historical and the cultural background, and if there is making and remaking of the meaning of those stimuli, rather than studying objectively, because human actions or human reality cannot be studied in isolation or by reductionist method. This is in contrast to the positivist or the functionalist paradigm that assume that the reality is relatively independent of the context, can be abstracted from their context and studied using objective techniques such as standardized measure. As I explained you earlier, that it is a subjective, a qualitative type of a research, subjective type of a research. It is different from the positivist or the functionalist approach. In for positivist or functionalist approach, we discussed about the positivist or the functionalist approach in our previous lecture. Again, what is positive and functionalist approach? Positivist or according to positivist or the functionalist approach, we can carry out our study objectively, and this study is independent of the context. Context doesn't matter in this type of the study. We can carry out the study independently of the context, and this study we can study objective techniques can be applied or should be applied for the studies. This is the positivist technique. While the interpretive ethnography, it is different from the objective technique, because in this the researcher try to find out the meaning of stimuli with regards to its historical and the cultural background, right? Context is important in interpretive ethnography, while in positivist or functionalist paradigm, context is not at all important. In According to interpretive ethnography, we cannot study the social reality objectively because it has been influenced by the external world. But according to the positivist and functionalist approach, we can study the social reality objectively by applying the objective method using standardized measures, right? Interpretive analysis is holistic and contextual rather than being reductionist and isolationist. So, we cannot carry out interpretive ethnography in isolation. It is contextual. The context matters a lot in interpretive analysis, and context plays an important role. It focuses on language, sign, and meaning from the perspective of the participants involved in the social phenomenon, in contrast to the statistical technique that are employed heavily in positivist research. In positivist research, we apply various types of the techniques and the tools, standardized tool like questionnaires, interviews, and other tools, and various type of research techniques we apply in positivist research to carry out our research objectively as we do in natural sciences. But interpretative this analysis focuses on the signs, symbols, language is very important in this interpretative analysis, and This tries to understand the meaning of the signs, the meaning of those symbols, as with respects to the participants involved in the social phenomenon. From the participants, right? From the point of view of the participants. So it is holistic and contextual type of a research. A rigor in interpretative research is viewed in terms of systematic and transparent approach for data collection and analysis rather than the statistical benchmark for construct validity and significance testing. It is very important if you want to generalize your result. It is very important that the techniques of your data collections should be very transparent and systematic. So, in interpretative research, emphasis has been given on the transparent approach and the systematic approach for the data collection. Data collection is very important whenever, because interpretative research totally depends on the data. So there should be a systematic way of data collection, and should be transparent approach should be adopted for the data collection. And while in positivistic research, data collection is also important, but the statistical construct validity and the significant testing plays an important role, while the significant testing and the benchmarking or construct validity is not important in interpretative research. In interpretative research, transparent approach of data collection is very important. In interpretative method, the researcher starts with the data and tries to derive a theory about the phenomenon of interest from the observed data. Interpretative research has its roots in anthropology, sociology, psychology, and linguistics. So, interpretive research includes anthropology, psychology, sociology, and linguistics. And the researcher tries to derive a theory from the observed data, while the positive research is carried out on the basis of existing theory. Normally it is carried out on the basis of existing theory, but in interpretive ethnography, the researcher try to derive a new theory from the observed data, and this research has its roots in anthropology, sociology, psychology, and linguistics. Central to the interpretive framework is notion of Varsthani or understanding. This Varsthani has been given. This word has been given by this phenomenon, or this has been explained by the Max Weber. So this the central for this interpretive framework is Varsthani or understanding. This framework focuses on understanding and meaning making rather than explanation. In this, the researcher try to find out the meaning behind any stimuli or behind any action. Meaningful action. So, this interpretive framework focuses on the understanding of the meaning making. What is the meaning of a particular sign, particular action, particular symbol, rather than explanation? With qualitative research, interpretive paradigm practices and method have become central and have been constantly shaping and reshaping the research method. So, meaning making is very important in interpretive ethnography. We try to find out, we try to explain the meaning of any social reality and the social action. How this interpretive ethnography has been evolved? It has evolved through four phases: the traditional period, then the modernist phase of interpretive ethnography, blurred genre of ethnography, interpretive ethnography, and period of intense reflection. Let us discuss this one by one. traditional period. Traditional period, according to the Clare, ethnography grew out of discourse of colonialism. It was about writing the culture, and the beginning stage it consisting of writing about other culture. So it started with writing of the culture, basically writing about the other cultures. Why? Because why it started with writing with the other culture? Because when the researcher, the assumption was that when the researcher knows about his or her culture, he could be biased. And interpretive ethnography totally is based on the unbiased interpretation by the researcher. So it started with writing the culture and basically writing about the other culture. It consisting of documenting traditions and socio-political practices among the people of ancient world during 3rd century BC. So it started with writing the culture, basically about the other culture, and documenting the tradition and the socio-economic or the political practices among the people of that culture. In the second stage of colonialization, ethnography was seen as means of saving culture that were being virtually annihilated. As a result of world wars, alternative form of ethnography emerged along with classical and traditional ethnography. So, what is traditional ethnography? Writing about the cultures, particularly about the writing about the others' culture, documenting the socio-political and economic conditions of that particular culture, and as a result, because of the world war, the alternative forms of ethnography emerged along with classical or the tradition ethnography. And then comes the modernist phase. First was the traditional phase of interpretive ethnography, and second is the modernist phase. What is modernist phase? The phase existed from world wars to 1970 and is still present in work of many people. In this period, many texts attempted to formalize the qualitative method. What is important about this phase is in this, many texts attempted to formalize the qualitative method. The modern the modernist ethnographer and sociological participants observers attempted rigorous qualitative studies of important social processes, including deviance, social control in classroom and society. So, during this phase, in modernist phase, the ethnographer, the sociological participants attempted to rigorously and qualitative study attempted to study about the processes like social deviance, social control, social process rigorously and qualitatively. This in modernist phase, it existed from the World War till 1970s. In this phase, the researcher attempted to formalize the qualitative research, and they tried to study about the social deviance, about social control and the social process rigorously. Another development was study of urban poor with social deviance, social control, apart from social deviance, social control, and social processes, the urban poors were studied. And the urban ethnography included contribution from the Robert Park and W.E.B. Du Bois and W.F. White was there. Instead of studying the culture far away, they started studying the culture which existed nearby. Contemporary ethnographers started highlighting interpersonal relationship and the personal struggle, and therefore reflexivity become an ingrained in ethnographic work. In this phase, The researcher or the started studying about the social process, about social deviance, about social control, about urban poor, rather than studying some other culture which is far away. They started studying the culture which existed nearby, and they started highlighting the interpersonal relationship and the personal struggle. And because of this, the reflexivity has been included in ethnographic works. Beginning in 1960s, anthropologists began to place much more focus on the symbols using a culture. They aimed to interpret the meaning of those symbols from within that society rather than just looking at them from their own society's point of view. So, in this phase, symbol played an important role. The researcher tried to explain the meaning of this symbol from the participants' point of view rather than its own society's point of view. So we discussed about the two phases. The first was the traditional phase. The traditional phase, in the traditional phase, the researcher tried to study mm, about the culture. That's too about the different culture. And then second phase was the modernist phase. The modernist phase, the researcher studied about the social deviance, social control, social processes, urban poor, rather than studying about the culture which is far away from the researcher. They started studying the culture which is near to them, and the reflexivity has been ingrained automatically in this, right, in modernistic approach, or in this phase, right. And symbol played an important role in modernist phase because the researcher tried to explain the meaning of the symbol from the participant's perspective rather than its own perspectives. The third phase is blood genre. By the beginning of the third stage, qualitative researcher had a full complement paradigm, method, and strategies to employ the research. In modernist phase, they tried to develop the qualitative methods for this study. By the third stage, by this stage, they have a full complements of paradigm, methods, and strategies to employ in their research. Now they have methods, they have strategies, they have a complement of paradigm to employ in their research. This was also the time that the research and writing was becoming more reflexive. New model of truth and method were sought. The erosion of classic norms in anthropology, that is objectivism, complicity with colonialism, social life structured by the fixed rituals and the customs, and the ethnographs as monument to a culture was complete. Critical, feminist, and epistemologies of the color now components for attention in this era. In this era, they have a full arena of full complement of paradigm methods and strategies to employ the research, and in this arena, this writing and the research become more reflexive. And at this time, this was the time of the erosion of the classical norms of objectivity, like of anthropology, like objectivism, complicity, and colonialism, complicity with the colonialism and the social life structured by the fixed rituals and the custom. Now, this is the arena of which paid attention to the critical, feminist, and epistemologies, right? Period of the fourth phase is period of intense reflection. According to Denizen, The blurring of genre gave rise to crisis of representation, which led to a period wherein the researchers were involved in intense reflection. This gave rise to the messy text, experiments in autoethnography, ethnographic poetics, anthropological and sociological poetries. The fifth stage is interpretive ethnography, meaning and method. The fifth, what is interpretive method, ethnography? What is the meaning of this, and what are the methods? So we discussed these four stages of evolution of interpretive ethnography: the traditional period, the modernist phase, the blurred genre, and the period of intense reflection. After the period of intense reflection, right? It is then comes the interpretive ethnography. What is interpretive ethnography? Ethnographic research is, like much other human action, an attempt to solve the problem of communication. The ethnographer must learn how to communicate with the researcher, with the researched well enough to maintain an acceptable presence in the field before any scholarly claim making can happen. See, in ethnography, we discussed that what is ethnography? It is the participant observation. It is known as the participant observation also. This is a type of a field study. In this, the researcher has to become the part of that particular subject or particular group under study, and they should understand their culture, their language, their social and the historic context from the point of view of the subject under study, right? So it is very important for the ethnographer to communicate with the subject under study well enough. They should have maintain an acceptable presence in the field before they carry out their research or before they make any scholarly claim. So ethnography is also known as the participant observations. It is a field work in which the researcher has to observe the thing covertly or overtly, right? We discussed about this covertly or overtly, right? And then he can explain or he can interpret that social phenomenon or culture of that particular community. And to do so, it is very important for a researcher that that community should accept the researcher, and before then only he can carry out the research and make any scholarly claim. Wezenkar describes ethnography as an exercise in miscommunication. According to him, achieving total control over what is communicated is impossible, and understanding what is really going on there remains partial and is never really fulfilled. So, according to him, that it is impossible that you can achieve a total control over what is communicated. You cannot fully understand what is really going on there. Your understanding remains partial and it can never be fulfilled. Clifford Gertz focus on symbols, text, and language gave birth to what is known as interpretive ethnography. He wrote about the thick descriptions and the web of significance, ushering a new era of ethnography. See, what is ethnography, interpretive ethnography? It is actually a communications. And Clifford Gertz focuses on the symbols, text, language. We discussed about this a few minutes back that the symbol, text, language, ethnography, interpretive ethnography includes symbols, text, linguistics, right? So this focuses on the text, on the symbols, on the language, and it has given birth to the interpretive ethnography. And What is this? This is the thick description or web of significance. What is this description? Thick description is an intensive, small scale, dense description of a social life from observation through which broader culture, interpretation, and generalization can be made. What is this thick description? Thick description is an intensive, small scale, but intensive, dense description of a social life. How you can describe the social life? This social life of a particular community through participant observation. So, thick description is a small scale but intensive and dense description of the social life from the observation through which broader cultural interpretation and generalization can be made. Through this text description, you can generalize your observation, or you can culturally interpret the things. Broader cultural interpretation could be done through the text description, and you can generalize your findings. So thick description is very important. Thick description is a small scale but intensive and the dense description of a social life from observation. And this thick description term was introduced in the philosophical writings of Gilbert Raleigh and developed by Clifford Geertz in anthropology, especially in his celebrated study of Balinese cockfight. He studied about the cockfight of Indonesia. Why this cockfight? This cockfight was an illegal game, but still acceptable in Indonesian society. So he used this thick description on his study, that is Balinese cockfight. He acknowledged that ethnographers' thick description are interpretations. Indeed, these descriptions are based in the part of interpretations of the informant, which in turn are interpretation of what informant think they are doing. Thick description is, that is the interpretation, and this interpretation is based on the information given by the participant. This interpretation is based on the point of view of the subject under study, and this interpretation explains what the informant think they are doing. What is the thinking of the subject under study? What is the perspective of the subject under study? So, thick description is interpretation. This interpretation is based on the informant, and it is the perspective of the informant, right? It is the perspective of the informant what they are doing. Apart from the thick description, interpretive ethnography is also characterized by widening methodological experimentations. Right? Thick description. Interpretive ethnography is characterized by widening methodological experimentation. The emerging methodological orientation is described metaphorically and dialogues as a dialogue and communication. What is the methodology? Dialogues and communication. Dialogue suggests exchange between the individuals of approximately equal status and in context of ethnographic field work. So this thick description is characterized by methodological experimentation, and the emerging methodological orientation is described metaphorically as a dialogue and the communication. What is the dialogue? Dialogue is the exchange between individual of approximately equal status. Interpretive ethnography is a methodology for studying the way in which social group constructs and lives in a particular indigenous version of reality. It aims to chart the network of the shared meaning that constitutes the reality within community. The interpretive ethnographer's job is to map out the ideology of community understanding through extending social engagement with informant. Interpretive ethnography has been termed as a part of postmodern ethnographies, which focuses on the visceral quality of understanding and attempts to highlight their personal or self in research context. This reconsideration in the field become as a symbolic anthropology, also described as interpretative anthropology. Interpretive ethnography has been termed as a part of postmodern ethnographies, which focuses on the visceral quality of understanding and attempt to highlight the personal or the self in the research context. And this is the reconsideration of the field is a symbolic anthropology. This interpretive ethnography offers a blueprint for cultural criticism. The criticism is grounded in specific words made visible in the ethnography. To understand, ethnography is a theory and value laden. There can be no value free ethnography, no objective, dispassionate, value neutral account of the culture in its way. When we say that this ethnography is unbiased or value free, no ethnography is value free ethnography. It is value laden ethnography. Every ethnography is a value laden ethnography. The focal of interpretive ethnography is understanding the meaning of phenomenon. Why? What is the basic aim or the aim of interpretive ethnography is to understand the meaning of phenomenon, why this phenomenon is going on. What is the reason? What is the meaning of a particular phenomenon? Interpretive ethnographers look to interpret the meaning of cultural practices. They try to interpret why these specific cultural practices were going on in a certain community or in a certain society. They try to interpret the meaning of those cultural practices. They are more focused on understanding the cultural meaning rather than the social action. So they try to. That's why this interpretive ethnography is contextual type of ethnography because it is the context of any culture depends on the historic and of any actions depends on the historic and the cultural things. So they try to focus on the understanding of a culture rather than the social action, because according to interpretive ethnography the social action depends on the culture of that particular community or the race. Interpretive reflexivity focuses on the mistake, gracelessness, hard won insight, experiments in attributions, and other intercultural encounters whose outcomes may or may not correlate predictably with social position. Critics of interpretive ethnography. This interpretive ethnography has been criticized, although there are certain benefits, but there still it has been criticized. The nature of interpretive research gave it some unique advantages. This kind of research is useful for exploring hidden reasons behind the complex, interrelated, or multi-phased social processes, such as institutional politics, violence against women, whereas the quantitative evidences may be biased, inaccurate, and otherwise difficult to obtain. So it is important, that interpretive ethnography is important. It has some unique advantage. What is the first unique advantage about this is it try to find out some try to explore some hidden reasons behind some complex interrelated social processes. They are often helpful for theory construction in the areas with no or insufficient prior theories. The second advantage is it helps in construction of the theories where priorly there were no theories or there are no theories. The third advantage is they are also appropriate for studying context specific, unique, or idiosyncratic event or processes. So, if you want to study some context specific or unique processes, interpretive ethnography is very important. It plays a very important role. Interpretive research can also help to uncover interesting and relevant research questions and issues follow up the research. So it helps to uncover very interesting and the relevant research questions. In addition to finding out answers, it can also help in raising the questions which needed to be addressed by the future researchers or by in the future. Interpretive ethnography has its own set of challenges. It has been criticized by the positivists on the method, truth, and verification. See, there are certain advantages. Now it has been criticized. There are certain disadvantages, and it has been criticized by the positivist. Why it has been criticized by the positivist? Because of its method, because of its truth and verification. It has been criticized on the basis of the methods, its truths and verification. According to positivists, a kind of research tend to be more time and resource intensive than positivist research in data collection and analytical efforts. According to positivist, this interpretive ethnography takes more time and more resources are required to carry out this interpretive ethnography because you have to be in field for a certain amount of a time, then only you can interpret that culture or that phenomenon. So it takes more time and it takes more resources than the positive research in data collection and analytical efforts. Too little data can lead to false or premature interpretations or assumptions, while too much data may not be effectively processed by the researcher. So, positivists criticized it on the basis of the time taken and the resources. More time and more resources are required for the data collection and analytical efforts. Apart from this, the data size, it has been criticized by the positive on the basis of the data size. If data size is too small, it may lead to a premature or the false interpretation. And if the data size is too large, then it would become difficult for the researcher to effectively process that data. Other criticism include the need of well-trained researcher who are capable of seeing and interpreting the complex social phenomenon from the perspectives of embedded participants. So it has been criticized on the basis of data collection, on the basis of the time, on the basis of the resources. Apart from this, it has been criticized on the basis of the training part of the researcher to carry out the interpretative research. The researcher should be well trained. He should be well trained so that should be able or the capable of seeing and interpreting the complex social phenomenon from the perspective of the subject and reconciling the diverse perspectives of these participants without injecting their personal biases or preconception into their inferences. So, it It is required to carry out interpretive ethnography that researchers should be unbiased, should be well trained, should be able to understand the perspective of the participant, and should be able to discuss this the perspective of the participant without their personal biases or the preconceptions into their inferences. All participants or data sources may not be equally credible, unbiased, or knowledgeable about the phenomenon of interest, or may have undisclosed political agendas which may lead to misleading or false impression. So while you are observing, while you are collecting the data from this subject, then the that the participants or the who are participating in the research or the data source may not be equally credible. They could be biased. They could have some reasons to participate in that particular research. They could have their political agendas. They might not be knowledgeable. And when this happens, that either the participant is biased, not knowledgeable, they are participating in the research with some political agendas or some other agenda, this may lead to misleading or false impression, because interpretive sociology totally depends on the interpretation which has been done on the basis of the from the perspective of the subject under study. Inadequate trust between the participants and the researcher may hinder full and honest self-representation by the participants, and such binding takes time. So, this relationship to trust a researcher and to trust the participant, this takes time. So, it is time-consuming process. The very described three techniques that assist ethnographer in developing accurate interpretation: a search for variation and conflicting evidences in the field, careful attention to the way that detailed the field observation are interpreted in thick minimal matches with social scientific concepts, understanding the social forces and leaves the people we observe. An alternate set of criteria was given by Lincoln and Guba in 1985. This helps in establishing a certain rigor interpretative research. What are these alternative set of criteria? That is dependability, credibility, confirmability, and transferability. So these are the criteria which helps in establishing a rigor interpretive research. Dependability: the interpretive research can be viewed as dependable or authentic if two researchers assessing the same phenomenon using the same evidences independently arriving at the same conclusion, or at the same researcher observing the same or the similar phenomenon at the different times and arrive at the similar conclusion. Then interpretative research could be said it is a valid research when either the two researchers carry out the research on the same phenomenon and leads to a same result, or if a single researcher carry out the same research at the different point of time and arrives at the similar or the same type of conclusion. This is dependability, and this is known as the reliability. This concept is similar to the reliability. Dependability could be ensured by providing adequate details about the phenomenon of interest, the social context in which it is embedded, and allow the readers to independently authenticate their interpretive inferences. Dependability, the second was the credibility. If the inferences of a research are believed, then its finding can be considered credible. This concept is akin to that internal validity of functionalist research. Next is confirmability. What is confirmability? It refers to the extent to which the finding reported in interpretive research can be independently confirmed by the others. This is similar to notion of objectivity in functionalist research. Next is transferability. It is Transferability in interpretive research refers to the extent to which the finding can be generalized to other settings. It is very important for we normally generalize our research results, so we can generalize our research when we can transfer our findings or generalize to the our findings. We can generalize our findings to the other settings, right? So this is similar to the external validity in functionalist research. Next is ethics and ethnography. Ethics plays a very important role in ethnography. What is ethnography? Ethnography is recording and analysis of the culture or society, usually based on the participant observation and resulting in writing account of people, place, or institution. That is ethnography. We discussed this in detail, right? This ethnography is known as the participant observation. The researcher goes in the field and interact with the group of people in their natural habitat. Ethnography, it is an excellent mode of inquiry where you can understand the behavior by and behavior of the people within a particular context, right? And to carry out, to understand the behavior, to understand their culture, it is very important that they should have informed consent from the subject, and informed consent is required. You cannot compel any of the participant to participate in your research. If you really want to carry out your ethnography research unbiasedly, and if you want to generalize the result, it is very important to inform your participant about your objectives and take the informed consent from your participant. Participant can never be compelled to participate. Informal consent is a broader sense, involves ensuring that prior to agreeing to the participate, research subjects are aware and particularly of the particulars of the research. So the participant should be well versed with their objective about your research, and he should give the consent to participate in your research. The question of ethics and any social inquiry is very important. The term research ethics refers to the norms. What is ethics? Ethics refers to the values, refers to the norms and the institutional arrangement that guide the researcher in course of his research. So norms, values and institutional arrangement which guides the researcher in the course of research. The sociologist must adhere to social ethics at all point of sociological inquiries. According to the Webster's New Word Dictionary, ethical is defined as conforming to the standard of conduct of a given profession or the group, and so the researcher should adhere to the particular standards or the conduct, right? Various ethical consideration that guides the ethnographical research, right? And what are those ethical consideration? Ethical consideration is collection of the principles that should be followed while doing human affairs. Ethical consideration makes sure that no one acts in such a way that is harmful to the society or an individual. It refrains people from organization from indulging in vicious conduct. what are the list of the various ethical consideration is informed consent. Take the informed consent from your participant, right? Voluntary participation is required. You cannot force anyone to participate in the research. Voluntary participation should be there. No harm to the participants. That your research should not harm any of the participants. You should not carry out that type of a research without informing, without taking the consent from the respondent, that it could harm, that there should be no harm of the participants, right? If you carrying out some research which could harm the participants, either they should be well informed, and if they feel like that they want to be part of the that research, then only they should be involved in that research. Then anonymity and the confidentiality, it is very important to maintain the, if required, and if the participants wanted that their name should not be disclosed, then it should not be disclosed. This is same with the researcher. At time researcher even don't want to disclose the name, right? As with the same with the participant, if they don't want to, it should not be disclosed. If they want to, if it is required, then you can disclose the name giving by taking the consent. Confidentiality should be maintained. You should not give the details about the participants. The confidentiality of the participant should be maintained by the researcher. No deceiving subjects. You should not deceive any of the participants. Don't make false promises which you are not going to fulfill. Don't deceive your subject. Do not harm your subject. Take informed consent from your subject. Voluntary participation should be there, right? Maintain the confidentiality of your subject as well as of your research, and anonymity is required if required. Maintain this, right? We discussed about all these things. Now, what are ethical practices? Well, what is the ethics? Honesty is one of the ethics, right, which one should follow. When you are carrying out some of the research, it is very important to be honest with your research, with your subject, right? Do not fool your subject or your readers. Honestly, at times what happens, researcher wants to show only the positive side, they don't want to show the negative side of their research, but that is not correct. Show the positive as well as the negative side of the research. Be honest with your subject, be honest with your reader. Objectivity should be there. Why you are carrying out the research, it should be objectively clear to you and your participants. Objectively discuss the phenomenon, what you observed, and how are you explaining that. Morality is very important. Morality is, these are the values and the norms which we accept from the researcher as well as from the participant. Moral values are required. Openness is required. Open up with your subject under study, right? Inform them what you are trying to find out. How will you carry out your research? What you expect from them? Be friendly with them. Try to be accepted by the participant. Then respect for the intellectual property. You should have respect for the intellectual property. If you are taking some references, say if you are taking some references from something, it is very important to mention that you have taken that reference from that particular study. Don't try to uh, breach the intellectual property rights, right? Don't try to copy paste others material in your study. So it is very important that you should follow these ethical practices. Confidentiality is very important. Maintain the confidentiality of your subject. If it can harm, make sure your study should not harm any of the subject. Take consent from your subject. If they want to maintain their confidentiality, and then only they can participate, try to make the confidentiality of your subject as well as other things if required. There are many other ethical things which one should follow apart from this. So, ethics is what? Ethics are normally the norms and the values which guides the researcher throughout its research work. What is expected from them, how they should carry out their research without creating any problem. There is a list of the ethics, and it is very important that in interpretive ethnography the researcher should follow the ethics.